Some of you may have heard about this one. My CJ professor was a sheriff's deputy for 27 years. One day, he told us about the last case he ever worked as a homicide detective. It was so emotionally traumatic for him that he physically couldn't continue investigating homicides after the investigation concluded, and he went back to being a patrol officer for the remainder of his career. He was working in a smaller city in Arizona, a couple hundred miles away in New Mexico, a teenager, about to graduate high school, and the first of his family to be accepted into college, went missing. His family filed a missing persons report that night, after calling all of his friends and searching his local hangout places. While retracing the route he was supposed to have taken, the local police found that a gas station security camera had captured footage of him being forced into the trunk of a car by 3 armed men. The officers were able to get a make and model of the vehicle, but having been the mid-90s, the camera quality wasn't good enough to get a license plate. A few days later, somebody found a body in the woods near the town where my professor was working. When he arrived on scene, he almost threw up. According to the coroner's report, they'd sawed the kid's hands and feet off while he was alive. They then cut his stomach open, disemboweled him, poured gas all over his body, and set him on fire. According to my professor, there was evidence that he hadn't died until after the flames had gone out, as he'd dragged himself away from the spot where he'd been set on fire, and the snow around the spot where he was found wasn't melted. As the crime had happened across state lines, he worked in conjunction with both the New Mexico local police and the FBI. The investigators involved had drawn straws to see who had to be the liaison with the family, and my professor drew the short one. He said that the hardest part of the investigation was to repeatedly fly to New Mexico and personally update the family, only to tell the boy's mother that she couldn't even bury her son yet, because they didn't want to risk losing any evidence on or in the body. They'd found DNA saliva from a crack pipe that was found under a tree a few dozen yards from the body, fingerprints also from the pipe, and tire tracks in the mud, and a few months later they finally got results for the DNA. They found one of the guys in his house with a meth lab in the garage and another one sleeping in a trailer out back. They were both drugged out of their minds. They found the hacksaw that they'd used to dismember the kid, still covered in his blood, in the trunk of the car which matched the tire tracks along with 4 guns and about 15 pounds of meth and crack. When they were interviewed, they said that they didn't even remember what they did with the kid after they kidnapped him. They asked where the third man was, and all they would say is that the police wouldn't find him. All they said is that they were selling meth in New Mexico, saw him and grabbed him. They couldn't explain their reasoning. That night, one hung himself in his cell with his shirt, and the other chewed out the veins in his wrist a week later. They never found the third guy. There was DNA in the car that didn't match the other 2, but there wasn't a match in the federal database which was still in relatively early stages at that point. As soon as that case was done with, my professor transferred out of homicide.